The words didn't shatter like glass. They landed with the dull, heavy thud of a bad investment. I stood in the minimalist lobby of the art gallery, the air conditioning humming against my tailored suit. "Get this beggar out." My father said it loud enough for every investor and influencer in the room to hear. His voice dripped with that familiar, arrogant disgust. The security guard, a man named David who I had hired personally, froze. His hand hovered near my elbow, his eyes darting between my father and me in utter confusion. He knew who signed his paychecks. My father did not. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct him. I simply met David's gaze, gave a microscopic shake of my head to signal him to stand down, and turned on my heel. If my father wanted a beggar, I would show him what poverty really looked like. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I navigated through the parking garage, the concrete walls amplifying the silence that had settled inside my car. It was a heavy, suffocating, quiet. The kind that usually precedes a storm. But inside my head, there was no storm. There was only the hum of a server room, the precise clicking of data falling into place. I pulled my phone from my purse. The screen glowed, illuminating the cockpit of my car like a command center. I logged into my business banking app. The numbers stared back at me, crisp and undeniable. $18,500. That was the pending transfer for the venue rental, the same venue where my father had just called me a beggar. $25,000. The deposit for Ashley's influencer retreat to Bali, designed to launch her brand globally, $120,000. The operating line of credit I had quietly secured to keep her business solvent while she played CEO. My thumb hovered over the screen. For years, I had treated these numbers as necessary expenses. They were the cost of doing business with my family. But business hours were over. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I tapped cancel on the venue transfer. I tapped revoke on the travel authorization. I tapped freeze on the credit line. Breach of contract, immediate liquidation. As the confirmation notifications rolled in, a memory forced its way to the surface. It wasn't a happy one. I was 22, sleeping on a beanbag chair under my desk at a startup incubator. I hadn't showered in 2 days because I was coding a patch that would eventually become the backbone of my first successful exit. I remembered calling home, exhausted, just wanting to hear my mother's voice. She had laughed. She told me I looked terrible in the photo I'd sent. She asked why I wasted my life staring at screens when Ashley was out making connections and building a brand. Ashley, who was using my tuition money to host brunch parties. Ashley, who had never stayed up past midnight for anything other than a club opening. They called me boring, they called me a workaholic, they called me invisible, but they never called me when the bills were due. For that, I was essential. I leaned back against the leather seat, watching the transaction-canceled banners slide down my screen. Why had I done it? Why had I funded them for so long? It wasn't because I was weak. It was because I was a gambler. I had fallen for the gambler's fallacy of love. I looked at my relationship with my family like a slot machine that hadn't paid out in years. I kept feeding it coins, my time, my money, my dignity, convinced that because I had put so much in, a win was inevitable. I told myself that the next check would be the one that triggered the jackpot. The next rescue would be the one that made them love me. I thought if I just invested enough capital, the market would correct itself. I thought affection was a commodity I could buy if I just met the asking price. But the house always wins, and my family was a rigged game. I wasn't an investor to them, I was the mark. Tonight, I wasn't walking away from the table because I was broke. I was walking away because I finally realized the machine was broken. I wasn't losing a family. I was cutting a loss. I took a deep breath, the air in the garage tasting like gasoline and cold concrete. I locked my phone. The assets were frozen. The credit was dead. The silence in the car wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and notifications. My phone sat in the cup holder, vibrating against the plastic every few seconds like a trapped insect. By the time I walked into my apartment, the silence of my sanctuary was shattered by the digital noise accumulating in my pocket. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat on the edge of my sofa and unlocked the screen. I expected anger. I expected panic. What I got was a masterclass in rewriting history. There were 32 new messages. Not a single one asked why I had left. Not one asked if I was okay. They were demands. Turn it back on. You're ruining everything. How could you be so selfish? Then I opened social media. And there it was. The Whisper campaign. Fully weaponized. Ashley had posted a selfie. Of course she had. She was crying. Mascara artfully smudged. Looking into the camera with wide, devastated eyes. The caption was a novel. I'm heartbroken to announce that tonight's launch has been compromised. My estranged sister, who has battled severe mental instability for years, decided to sabotage my dream in a manic episode. Please send prayers for her healing and for our family as we navigate this crisis. I stared at the words, mental instability. The breath left my lungs in a sharp hiss. It wasn't just a lie. It was the answer to a question I hadn't realized I was asking. For years, I wondered why I wasn't invited to the galas, the dinners, the holidays. I thought they were just ashamed of my job, or my lack of glamour. But it was darker than that. They hadn't just excluded me, they had pathologized me. They had been telling people I was crazy to explain away my absence. They used a lie about my health to cover up the truth about their greed. If I was unstable, they didn't have to explain why the sister who paid for everything was never in the photos. It was brilliant. And it was evil. Then I thought about my father in that lobby. Get this beggar out. Why use that word? Why call the woman funding your existence a beggar? It was the illusion of power of the empty wallet. My father knew, deep in the darkest, most honest part of his subconscious, that he was the dependent one. He knew he was the beggar. And that knowledge ate him alive. To survive his own ego, he had to project that weakness onto me. He had to humiliate me publicly to lower my status in his own mind. If he could make the world see me as small, then for a fleeting moment, he could feel big. He wasn't shouting at me in that lobby. He was shouting at his own reflection. A heavy pounding on my front door snapped me out of my analysis. It wasn't a knock, it was a demand. I walked to the door, my socks sliding on the hardwood. I didn't ask who it was. I knew. I slid the chain lock into place and cracked the door 3 inches. Tyler, Ashley's husband, stood in the hallway. He looked like a man whose life had just been voided. His shirt was half untucked. His face flushed a mottled, angry red. Fix this, he hissed, seeing my face in the gap. Right now. The vendors are walking out. The caterers are packing up the trucks. You need to unlock the funds. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the panic, but I also saw the entitlement. He didn't see a person. He saw a broken ATM that he needed to kick until it dispensed cash. They're your family, Lena, he spat, stepping closer, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and desperation. You owe them. I reached for the folder I had left on the entryway table. I slid it through the crack in the door. It hit his chest with a soft slap. What is this? He asked, grabbing it. Commercial lease agreement, breach notice, I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor he was looking for. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Tenant conduct detrimental to the property owner's reputation. He blinked, confusion warring with rage. I don't owe tenants who damage the property, I said. And the bank is closed. I didn't wait for his response. I didn't wait for the inevitable threats, or the pleading that would follow, when the anger ran out. I simply closed the door, and slid the deadbolt home. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the loudest thing I had heard all night. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep felt like a luxury for people who didn't have enemies sleeping in their guest rooms, or in my case, living off my equity. Instead, I spent the hours between midnight and dawn compiling data. By 8 a.m., I wasn't just an angry daughter. I was a plaintiff. I hired Jessica, not because she was kind, but because she was lethal. She was a forensic accountant turned litigator who looked at family trees and saw only liability charts. When I walked into her office, a glass cage overlooking the city skyline, I didn't bring tissues. I brought 3 hard drives. I want an audit, I told her, placing the drives on her obsidian desk. A full autopsy. Personal, professional, and historical. Jessica raised an eyebrow, tapping a manicured fingernail against the metal casing. Historical? That gets expensive, Lena. And ugly. Usually, clients want to stop when they find the first 100 grand. I don't want to stop, I said. I want to know about the scholarship. For years, that scholarship had been the golden calf of our family mythology. My parents claimed they had sold a precious family heirloom, a diamond brooch my grandmother left behind, to fund Ashley's first startup attempt. It was the story they told at every dinner party, to illustrate their sacrifice and Ashley's destiny. It was the reason they couldn't help me with my tuition. We gave it all to Ashley, they would say, because she had the vision. Find the sale record of that brooch, I instructed. I want to know who bought it. Jessica nodded. If it exists, I'll find it. 2 days later, the summons came. Jessica didn't call me. She sent a courier. The message was simple: come in, now. When I arrived, the atmosphere in her office had shifted. The air was thin, sharp. Jessica wasn't sitting behind her desk. She was standing by the window, holding a single sheet of paper. Sit down, she said. It wasn't a suggestion. She slid the paper across the desk. It wasn't a receipt for a brooch. It was a loan agreement from a predatory lender, dated 10 years ago. The scholarship never existed, Jessica said, her voice devoid of pity. They never sold the heirloom. In fact, your mother was wearing it in an Instagram photo last Christmas. I stared at the document. The loan amount was $50,000. The interest rate was criminal. So where did the money come from? I asked, though a cold knot was already tightening in my stomach. Look at the signature, Jessica said. I looked. There, at the bottom of the page, was my name, Lena Vance. The handwriting was a shaky, looped attempt to mimic my own. The memory hit me like a physical blow. 10 years ago, I was 18. I had started getting calls from debt collectors. I was terrified. When I asked my parents about it, they told me I must have clicked a phishing link, that I had been irresponsible with my identity online. They lectured me for hours about financial literacy. They watched me work 3 jobs to pay off my mistake. I paid off that loan. Every cent. I spent 2 years eating ramen and skipping heating bills to fix a mess I thought I had made. They didn't sell a brooch, I whispered, the realization making the room spin. They sold my credit score. Identity theft, Jessica corrected. First-degree forgery, wire fraud. They took out a loan in your name to fund Ashley's vision, let you pay it back, and then gaslighted you into thinking you were the screw-up. I touched the signature. It was my mother's handwriting. I could see the way she crossed her T's, a flourish she thought was elegant but was actually just evidence. They hadn't just stolen my money, they had stolen my reality. For a decade, I believed I was bad with money. I believed I was careless. I carried that shame like a stone. And they watched me carry it. They watched me pay for their crime. And called it a life lesson. What do you want to do? Jessica asked. We can sue for civil damages. It's a slam dunk. I looked up. The shame was gone. In its place was something cold, hard, and absolutely necessary. Civil is for disputes, I said. This is a felony. I pushed the paper back across the desk. Draft the affidavit, and call the police. I convened the meeting at 9 p.m. The gallery was dark, stripped of the champagne flutes and the floral arrangements that had cost more than my first car. The only light came from a single projector humming on the conference table, casting a stark, white square against the far wall. I sat at the head of the table, my hands folded on top of the forensic file. I wasn't nervous. Nerves imply uncertainty, and I had none left. I had the math. They arrived 10 minutes late, a power move that felt pathetic given the circumstances. Robert pushed the glass doors open, nearly shattering them. He marched in, followed by Susan, Ashley, and a man in an ill-fitting suit who I assumed was their lawyer. He looked exhausted, like a man who had realized too late that his clients couldn't afford his retainer. Who do you think you are? Robert boomed, his voice echoing in the empty space. Locking us out of our own launch? Calling meetings in the middle of the night? You've lost your mind, Lena. Ashley was right behind him. Her face blotchy from crying, clutching her phone like a talisman. You're jealous. She spat. That's all this is. You couldn't stand that I was succeeding, so you had to burn it down. I didn't speak. I didn't defend myself. I simply pressed a button on my laptop. The projector flared to life. On the wall, 10 feet high, appeared a document. It wasn't a lease. It was a line-item audit of the brand's operating expenses for the last 18 months. "Sit down," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their noise like a scalpel. "We're not sitting anywhere until you unfreeze the accounts," Tyler shouted, stepping forward. "Sit down," I repeated, "or I email this PDF to the IRS right now." The threat of the taxman did what decency couldn't. They sat. I stood up and walked to the screen. "Let's review the quarterly earnings," I said, tapping the projection. Or rather, the quarterly embezzlements. I scrolled. The screen blurred, then focused on a series of withdrawals totaling $40,000. "Item 1, I said. "Market research trips." I clicked to the next slide. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left, the withdrawal dates. On the right, Robert's geotagged photos from a casino in Las Vegas. "Dad," I said, looking at him. "You aren't a market researcher. You're a gambling addict." Susan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Robert's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "That was networking," he stammered. "I was meeting investors." "You were playing baccarat," I corrected. "And you lost." I scrolled again. Item 2. Inventory acquisition. The screen showed invoices for luxury handbags, designer shoes, and a lease on a Range Rover. "Ashley," I said. "You don't sell shoes. You sell digital presets. Why is the company leasing a car you drive to brunch?" "It's for the image," Ashley shrieked. "You don't understand branding. You have to look the part." "You look like a thief," I said. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Miss Vance, while these expenses may be irregular, this is a civil matter. A family dispute regarding the allocation of funds, is it?" I asked. I walked back to the table and picked up the single sheet of paper Jessica had given me. The one that changed everything. "This isn't about bad bookkeeping," I said, sliding the paper toward the center of the table. "This is about the seed money." I projected the final image. The loan document. The forged signature. The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the break room. 10 years ago," I said, my eyes locked on my mother. "You told me you sold Grandma's brooch to fund Ashley's dream. You told me you sacrificed your legacy for her future." Susan looked down at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. "You didn't sell a brooch," I continued. "You sold me. You took out a predatory loan in my name, forged my signature, and let me spend my 20s paying off a debt I didn't owe. You watched me work 3 jobs. You watched me skip meals. You lectured me on responsibility while you spent stolen money." Robert slammed his hand on the table. "We did what we had to do. You were the strong one. You could handle it. Ashley needed help." "I didn't need help," I said. "I needed parents." I pointed to the screen. "That signature? That's not a mistake, Dad. That's first-degree forgery. That's identity theft. That's wire fraud." I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. "This isn't a civil dispute. This is a felony. 15 years minimum in federal prison." The bluster drained out of Robert instantly. He slumped in his chair, suddenly looking very old and very small. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrifying clarity of consequences. Ashley looked between her parents, waiting for them to fix it, waiting for the lie that would save her. But there were no lies left. The ledger was balanced. "So," I said, opening the folder that contained the surrender agreement. "Here is how this is going to work." I slid the folder across the table. It stopped directly in front of their lawyer. A heavy black block of judgment on the white laminate. "Option A," I said, my voice flat. "I file the police report. I hand over the forensic audit to the district attorney. You go to trial for forgery, wire fraud, and grand larceny. You lose the house. You lose the cars. You lose your freedom." I looked at Ashley. She was shaking, her mascara running in dark rivets down her cheeks. "Option B," I continued. "You sign this." The lawyer opened the folder. It was an asset surrender agreement. A complete and total liquidation of their empire, to cover the debts they had accrued in my name and the funds they had embezzled from the business accounts. You surrender 100% of the equity in the brand, I listed. You sign over the lease on the gallery. You liquidate the inventory to pay back the vendors you stiffed. You sign a confession admitting to the forgery, which I will hold in a safe deposit box. If you ever contact me again, or if you ever disparage me publicly, that confession goes to the DA. Ashley let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. You can't take the brand. It's my name. It's my life. I looked at her, at the designer dress she had bought with stolen money, at the face that had launched 1,000 lies. You don't have a brand, Ashley, I said. You have a deficit. She looked at her husband, then at our parents. She was waiting for them to save her, just like they always had. But Robert was staring at the table, defeated by the weight of 15 years in federal prison. Susan was weeping silently into a handkerchief. The lawyer closed the folder and pushed it toward Robert. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence screamed that they had no cards left to play. Robert picked up the pen. His hand trembled, not with sorrow, but with the rage of a man who had finally met a boundary he couldn't bully his way through. He signed. Then Susan, then Ashley, sobbing so hard she could barely hold the pen. I watched them sign away their illusions. It didn't feel like triumph. It didn't feel like joy. It felt like cleaning a wound, painful, necessary, and sterile. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a foreclosure. Get out, I said, when the last signature was dry. They left in silence. No one looked back. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the dark gallery with the projector still humming, illuminating the evidence of their crimes. I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence. It was the first time in my life I wasn't paying for the noise. 6 months later, I stood in the same gallery. It was empty now. The walls were bare, the expensive lighting fixtures sold off. The polished floors scuffed from the movers. I had spent the last half year acting as the executor of their bankruptcy. I liquidated everything. The luxury handbags, the leased cars, the office furniture. I used every cent to pay back the florists, the caterers, the small business owners my family had tried to cheat. I made sure every vendor was made whole. I didn't keep a dime. I didn't want their money. I didn't want their tainted legacy. I wanted a clean ledger. My parents had moved into a small rental 2 towns over. Robert was working part-time. Ashley had disappeared from social media, her influencer career imploding the moment the funding dried up. I hadn't spoken to them since that night in the boardroom. My phone was quiet, my email was boring, my life was smaller, perhaps. Lonelier, certainly. But it was mine. I walked to the front door of the gallery. The air smelled of dust and fresh paint. The smell of a blank slate. I took the key from my pocket, locked the glass door, and dropped the key through the mail slot. I walked away without looking back. I sat at a corner table in a coffee shop, the steam from my latte curling against the screen of my new laptop. It wasn't a corporate office. It wasn't a glass cage. It was just a table, but it was the headquarters of something real. I typed the final sentence of the mission statement and hit publish. The website went live, the Ledger Fund. It wasn't a charity, it was a venture capital firm. But the investment criteria were specific. We funded women in tech, women who had been overlooked, women who had been the silent partners in their own families, the ones who kept the lights on while everyone else took the bows. I smiled, watching the site load. I was finally investing in the right people. I was betting on the underdogs, the grinders, the ones who knew the value of $1 because they had to earn every single one twice. I leaned back, looking out the window at the city moving by. I thought about the girl who slept under her desk. I thought about the woman who paid for a party she wasn't allowed to attend. I thought about the daughter who paid off a forgery to save her parents' reputation. They were all gone now. In their place was someone who knew exactly what she was worth. And if you are listening to this, I need to speak to you. Yes, you. To the invisible investor. To the daughter who fixes the problems she didn't create. To the sibling who pays the bail, the rent, and the tuition, only to be told she's lucky to have a family. I see you. I know the weight of that checkbook. I know the exhaustion of buying love that is never delivered. You are not a bank. You are not a safety net. You are the CEO of your own life, and you have been letting people with bad credit run your board of directors for too long. Stop waiting for the return on investment. It isn't coming. They will not wake up one day and realize what you sacrificed. They will only realize what they lost when you close the account. So close it. Audit your life. Look at the transactions. If the love you are receiving doesn't match the capital you are investing, declare bankruptcy on that relationship. Cut the line of credit. Walk away from the table. It will be quiet at first. It will be scary. But I promise you, the silence isn't loneliness, it's freedom. And on the other side of that silence is a life that actually belongs to you. They called me a beggar. But I realized I was the bank. And the bank is now closed to them, but open for business for everyone else. If you've ever felt like the silent investor in your own family, hit share. Let's rewrite the ledger together. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.